I'm Amanda Johnson. I know it talks about my credentials on there, but that is not really the only thing that I am. I also am a music educator, professional musician. I have been doing van life and or car life or any sort of vehicle dwelling for a very long time. So the things that we're going to cover today is preparing for getting on the road. We're really going to spend the most time on that section because it is the preparation you do before you get on the road, or things that you didn't think that you would need to prepare. Obviously, with you being able to interact with me, you'll let me know if there's anything that I'm missing in this talk. But the very first thing we're getting into, besides just preparing for everything, is, for goodness sake, secure everything in place. And that right there is already going to help so much with not losing stuff in an accident and or hurting yourself in an accident too. But, you know, in the grand scheme of it, it's the rig. We got to think about our rig, right? Our rig is something that we are living in and or, well, I should say living because of. Many of us have many different reasons for being here, such as by choice, by force, whether or not we're hoping to get back into housing, or if we're just like, this is it, I'm home free. In the grand scheme of it all though, how much does your life actually get represented by a meme? We've seen it on the skits. We've seen it while we've binge watched on Netflix. But how does your life actually get represented by a meme when living in this way? If I was going to say that I have a meme to describe, I didn't want to create anything because, let's face it, I'm a musician, not an artist. But if I was going to say that my life was a meme, listen and just close your eyes if you need to envision it. Mine would be sitting on the edge of a cliff, back doors open, not exactly Instagram pretty. I'm looking at that cliff and I look over the edge and it's a benefits cliff. That is the meme that represents my life. So if you have any contributions for what is a meme that represents your life, please put them into the chat mod and they will pass it along to me as well to see what it is. But do our lives really get represented by living in a van down by the river all the time? Not for those of us who are stealthing, not for those of us who are doing this not out of necessary choice. So another thing that I want you to keep in mind with the memes is the way that your family and your friends view your lifestyle, because those are the ones who are going to be your emergency contacts. So when I asked in the poll the following questions about when you're visiting your family and friends, what level of support you have, I want you to think about whether or not you have a strong community when you go to visit your friends and family, and whether or not you have a little bit of community. Those who are, you know, they're super, super busy, but, you know, they might be able to hang out with you in that time. If it's one of those things where it's a last resort only, if you're having issues, you could only call them if it's like something they can immediately help you with, but it's not going to take much out of their life. Or you might have very little to no support at all. There you go. So thinking about those, if I'm looking at your answers, I see that there are a lot of people that feel that they have some community, some that may have a last resort, but for the most part, it's a variation. Even from our poll, out of the 10 people who answered, we have a variation of all of those. So what I mean by this as well is that it might change if you have an issue. You don't know how your family is going to react in this situation until you get into that, like having an accident, or if you're going through something, grief, if you're going through a loss, if you're going through a victory. The things that change the most is when you're on the road itself, though. So the other question I ask is, when you're actively traveling, like, and you're nowhere near your friends and family, what level of support do you have? So in that case, lots of ride or dies. We had a couple of folks that said that they have some of that, but the majority of folks, they are surprisingly talking about how they might be able to call someone. So in this case, if we have these varying levels of support and you're not quite sure who's going to be your emergency contact, then making a list of those who might be able to support you would be best. Those who have lots of ride or dies, I don't think you have to make quite a list. You know who to call on. But those who are in that level of C, go ahead and make your emergency contact list ahead of time. Don't wait. I did not realize that I would need personally to make a list like that before, until I had dealt with issues on the road. And I'll get into those a little bit, but we're just checking in on who we have here. For example, we might have some people who are staying in place, some who are commuters, where they're going to work or they're sleeping near their job, where they're only a weekend warrior, or where they're going far and wide. I am in category D now, but I have been in A, B, C, D, and even E before. For those of you who answered other, if you could go ahead and let our chat mod know what that means, I'd love to know, okay? So I'm just looking to see if I got any chats, not so far. So again, feel free to answer at your will. But thinking about how we have these different situations, those three categories right there are going to determine what kind of insurance you get. I am not an insurance expert in the way of like having worked in the industry or anything like that. I am an expert at dealing with insurance. This one right here, mileage, is the big surprise. Most of you might think that the long haulers are the ones putting on the most mileage. But I will tell you from my experience, I put on way more miles when I was doing stealth car camping in Los Angeles for 2 years than I ever did on the road. I averaged about 36,000 miles when living in Los Angeles, and in Austin, I've also done it there. But with long hauling, I'm about 20,000 miles a year. So that is one of the big surprises that you have to think about. Like, oh, I actually am using a lot more if I'm having to commute or even staying in place. If you are an Uber driver doing anything where you are using your vehicle for work, you have to think about that too, because your coverages are going to be different depending on that. Like if they found out and you had a personal policy, if they found out that your personal policy was being used while you were driving to do deliveries, they may not cover your accident. And then in terms of residency, that's going to be more for those who are in the RV / motorhome style of insurance. Obviously personal insurance would not cover that, but let's take a look at those three sorts of insurances that we're going to be dealing with for the most part as vehicle dwellers. So I'm going to list out some of the things that I found surprising with my own vehicle dwelling and going into the different policies that I needed, depending on if I was a stealth camper, if I was in my minivan, if I was in my conversion, pre-conversion, post-conversion. So for the personal one, obviously I just mentioned how it excludes business use. This is for real, because if they find out that you're using it for business purposes, then they might deny your claim. But for those of you who are vehicle dwellers, you might be surprised that if you have an address where you have renters or homeowners insurance, I know I have friends that I had used their address when I was in Austin for the longest time because I was with them most of the time. I was mooch docking. But for that one, if they have renters insurance, you have renters insurance, whoever is the listed homeowner or renter, if there is a way for you to be on their policy, that is how you get your belongings to be covered. Otherwise, if everything goes all over the place, you have some damages to your equipment. For example, I'm a musician, so it would be likely that an accident in one of my vehicles would hurt one of my instruments. That's going to be covered with the renter's insurance. In terms of the next level, commercial insurance. Now, most of you might be like, okay, well, I'm mostly living in my van. What does this have to do with me? Well, if you are pre-conversion, this is where you're likely going to be asked by certain companies, and notice I'm not being specific with costs or certain companies, it's because it's going to change. This is a living fluid situation that we're in, whether it's the Johnson versus Grants Pass or if it's insurance companies. I'll get into that a little bit more later. But this is going to be something better if you are having more complex legal issues as well, if you're using a work truck or if your car's sedan. But I found this also during my research where you have hired and non-owned auto insurance. Look into it. If you are using your vehicle at all for any sort of work, it will cover you. So in terms of the next level, this is the one that most people are confused about. It's whether or not your RV or your temporary or permanent. Some considerations is that you are only insured to drive that vehicle. This comes into play when you're dealing with having to rent a car after an accident. You have to get the insurance through the rental agency because you don't have insurance other than that one vehicle. It's cheaper, but it's because you're only covered on that one vehicle. And then another aspect is that you will have your emergency expense coverage it's an umbrella. So for example, when I got in an accident and I had to wait to fix my vehicle a few months, I did it where I bartered for my housing, so I didn't take away from like hotel costs or anything like that. But that same thing also took care of my rental. It took care of the rental insurance too. And it took care of anything else that's going to help you while you're displaced. So I'm going to check the chat box. Does anybody have anything to say about personal, commercial, or RV temporary permanent that you've had to consider when you're shopping for insurance? While y'all are thinking about that, I have an anonymous comment. Having ties to multiple geographic locations and wishing to travel more. Let me go ahead and get into that while everybody's thinking about any other considerations for insurance, personal, commercial, or RV insurance. I used to travel a lot because I was visiting family and friends. A lot of them may or may not have had health issues. So that was really awesome to have this lifestyle, to be able to see them at will while I'm still working. I work remotely. But in the grand scheme of it all, yeah, that's the other. That is the other. We may just be like having our community all over the country as opposed to in one area. So very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. So in terms of any answers, I haven't seen any answers for this part yet, but if anybody has any answers, feel free to just put them in the chat box, send them to the chat mod, and let us know what else you think of. However, this stuff means hardly anything if it's their opinion versus yours. Please get a dash cam. I tell all family and friends, I don't care what their level of using their vehicle is, get a dash cam. A dash cam at the Getting Place, and for those of you who know, the Getting Place online or the Getting Place in person, $36, okay? For $36, you can make it so that if someone claims that you did something that you didn't, that you have the camera that's constantly recording, and that's why you have such a small memory card, because your memory card is going to be rewriting itself over and over, but it does it in 5-minute increments. And all you do is if you get an accident, then you go and you save that video and you preserve it. This has helped so much when I've had somebody that claims that, she should have stopped at time. Well, if you don't have brake lights and I have this gigantic vehicle and it's raining and you decide that you're going to stop out of nowhere, likely than not, I'm going to hurt your vehicle because I'm heavier, but I also have proof from my dash cam. So please, for $36, cover yourself. Cover yourself. I've also had to use my dash cam when I had the choice between hitting somebody who was next to me or hitting the tire in the road and seeing where it went afterwards just to make sure everyone was okay. The dash cam was awesome for that too. So another thing that is very good for you to keep in mind when you are getting ready to get on the road and such, that you need to have an inventory checklist. I just want to go ahead and go back and show you a little bit why. So this is an application, for example, for an RV insurance, and they're going to ask you about numerous things. They're going to ask you, obviously, for your information. Look at the kind of information that they're looking for, though. And so if you're thinking ahead of time about what do I need for my personal belongings, what am I doing with it, this helps you with your coverages. And you will be surprised, especially with a lot of the online insurance companies, that they'll tell you ahead of time, oh, it's only $10 more a month or a year. Just go for it, because I have plenty of stories of people who lost their stuff. But I just wanted to show you why having an inventory checklist would be good, because then you at least know what you've got for your coverages, what you need. And this is just going back, as I said, if you're doing RV type, what you're going to be expected to know. However, if you're like, I don't want to do a checklist from scratch or that crazy inventory sheet you showed me, because, look at this inventory sheet. That's nuts. It's like, I don't know about you, but Excel's not my strong suit. But if you go online and you just look up a checklist, this will give you an idea of what you have in there, and then that helps you with coverage. But another reason why you also want to make sure that you have a checklist and everything is because sometimes we damage things just from simply moving. So if you have an accident, suddenly that accident's going to turn into like, oh my goodness, what was it that I lost? Those of us who know, we know though. Who has ever played What Fell in the Back while you've been driving? Okay, so this right here, let's see what fell in the back for me the other day. It's anything could have fallen in the back. There you go. So if you're playing this kind of game on a normal basis, that is the hint that, hey, I'm just moving. Maybe I need to secure my stuff, because if you're moving and you're having things falling down, imagine what happens if you suddenly stop when you're in an accident. All that stuff becomes a projectile. Okay, so I had a couple of questions I would like to address in the chat. I appreciate your guys' patience with that. So someone had asked me how I determine the target vehicle purchase, whether it's a commercial one, and whether or not you have to require it, and how to navigate it. So commercial insurance, let's just get into that real quick. So commercial insurance is something that I was told after I had a big accident. Thankfully, my bed frame that my brother had built was steel reinforced doubly over. And so when that had happened, I had normal insurance. And that was in a conversion. It did not cover anything in my van. It did not cover any of the build. It only covered the van. So that was my personal insurance. Then after I bought this one, yes, I had to convert 2 vans in 1 year, both brand new. When I had bought this one and I went back to that same insurance company, they told me we no longer insure those types of vehicles. A Ram ProMaster is what I have. We no longer insure those types of vehicle under personal. And the reason I originally went personal is because it had gap insurance. You can get gap insurance, which if you're financing your vehicle, will pay the difference between your loan, what you owe on your loan, and what the actual vehicle value is. So that's why I'd gone that way. When I went back to them, they're like, oh, we could only do commercial insurance. So they weren't even going to give me a choice. So one thing to consider with commercial insurance is if it's a pre-build, a lot of companies will just force you into it because you have this type of van. If you have something that's not usually considered a commercial vehicle, then you won't have that issue. In terms of choosing a different vehicle to modify, I would say that this has been my favorite configuration because I could still do tent only sites, and I have RV insurance. Although I'm only covered on this one vehicle, everything is covered. RV insurance, though, depending on the company, there's two big companies I'm thinking of. Again, I'm not going to actively endorse anybody, but one company says that your build has to be professionally done. Meaning like by any of the builders that have their own warranty. The reason they say that is because they expect that if there's going to be damage inside of your van, that their warranty will cover it. That same company also says that they only cover RVs or vans that are converted that are now considered RV style, that they only cover them if they're 6 years and younger. And while another company is a little bit more flexible, higher rates, but you could convert it yourself with that bigger company. I'll just go with that. You just will pay a little bit more. I hope that helps. In terms of the second one I had someone ask about or say that they had to tell their insurance company that they were full-time in their motorhome. And I would say it is not more expensive. The rate that I'm paying right now as an RV in my van is insanely cheap. And they know I'm a permanent resident. They know it. So I don't think that it is more expensive as a full-time. They didn't even ask for the mileage. So that's something to consider. Just shop around. This talk is more about not specific things. The reason I'm not giving the link, for example, thank you, Scott, for asking. The reason I'm not giving the link for that specific dash cam is because, as we know, on the online getting place, they're not always available. So it could change from one day to the next, just depending. But they're usually Chinese companies, and I've even gotten it at the in-person getting place. I've also gotten those same kind of dash cams. Actually, I'll just show you one right now. So this one stays on my dash all the time. I got this at Wally World for $25. So that's why I didn't put a link for that $36 one. However, I'll go ahead and put it I'll put it in a resource guide afterwards because I have a lot of links to share with everybody. How about we get back to it, because now we got to get into the second section. Okay, what happens when you do actually get into the accident? Because it's going to happen. I have many reasons that accidents have happened without flinging faults in any direction. But what we have to do when we get into the accident, I'm going to take this for those who may or may not have certain feelings about law enforcement. We'll talk about when you really actually have to talk to them, whether or not there's injuries, and then when it comes to going to your next steps. But let's think a little further on this. Okay, so I'm gonna just, if anybody has any particular suggestions for this, we're gonna think about the difference between non-injury and injury. In some states, you don't need to even say anything about it. So in some states, you may not even have to call LEO. But in other states, you have to call law enforcement no matter what, even if there is no injury. That was a surprise to me. If you have an injury, then the first thing, of course, is your health. You're immediately going to call your, emergency services. But this right here is why I say to have your health coverage in place, because your car insurance or your vehicle insurance, yes, they're probably going to go and cover your medical stuff. However, they're not going to get to it right away. You're going to be dealing with out-of-pocket expenses. So get your health insurance in place and know what you have for that, because you're likely going to go through them and they'll be reimbursed through your insurance. You'll be reimbursed for anything. You need to save all of your receipts for that reason. We'll get to that a little bit more. But something that's really important for both is you need to get pictures. Okay, I am not kidding when I say that I am always flabbergasted that law enforcement do not always take pictures. I was speaking to somebody who recently went through a tragic loss in which the person was ran down on their bike, and the law enforcement didn't even get there until after they were taken up into the helicopter. And so there's no pictures, and that would help with a lawsuit. Another thing is get pictures, because sometimes they'll claim that there's more damage than there was actual to the accident. But again, that's why you have a dash cam. Does anybody have any other suggestions for what you should do when it comes to non-injury or with injury accidents? I'd like to wait and see if anybody can respond with that. What else should we do with non-injury or injury accidents? And don't worry, we're going to do this. Is going to be where we discuss throughout. So you do not have to wait until the end to answer. Just go ahead and make sure that you're sending your responses to the chat mod. If you want to be anonymous, then yes, someone brought up witness contact information. It depends on the state. Okay, so I'm going to come back to us for that. Thank you for bringing that up. Witness contact information. In the states in which they say that law enforcement must be, it's not even state, sometimes it's county actually, but in the places in which you can, you have to put in a call to law enforcement, no matter if there's injury or not, no matter how small the incident is, they say in those areas that witnesses are not to give you that information. They all have to go to law enforcement. Guess what? The other drivers, they also don't have to give you their information. It all goes to law enforcement. So, and we'll get into that a little bit more. The same with exchanging insurance information. You would think that every place is like, yeah, but I found out while in Florida, it was this particular place. I was there in Florida doing disaster relief, and which means that everybody that was driving around was in this crazy fog, lots of survivors on the road. And so in that area, it was the fender bender I was talking about earlier, where they just weren't thinking. They saw a pedestrian just stopped out of nowhere when it's raining, and like not accounting for the fact that the people behind them might not be able to stop as quickly, but they were a survivor. So, you know, I give him some slack on that part. But in that case, he refused to give me his contact info, and he was the one that informed me that law enforcement must do all of the stuff. So yes, I always go for exchanging information, getting their insurance info, but sometimes, depending on where you are, you might have to do it through the law enforcement. But we'll get into that a little bit next time. So the next time is move vehicles before the police arrive. I think it's safer to do that, but in California, for example, we were always discouraged from that. I don't know if we were discouraged from that, or if people were just like, yeah, I just think being in lane number 3 is the best place for our vehicles to be. But in a lot of other states, they actually have signs that tell you to move your vehicles over to the side of the road. I think personally it's safest to move them over, get them out of the lanes of traffic if you can, because you don't want to take the chance of it becoming a pileup. But very good question / suggestion. So that gets us into what to do if it's drivable and it's not drivable. Okay, so if it's drivable, yes, move it to the side of the road. That's what I say. Okay, so that is move over. And if it's not drivable, you put on your hazards. You make sure that you are inside the vehicle. Okay, or if you're not inside the vehicle, go at least, you know, get off to the shoulder. So your physical person, human to the shoulder. Okay, because if you can do that, then that is more safe for you anyways. What's something that we would need to do no matter what, if it's drivable or not drivable? What do you think? What would be something that we would have to do no matter what? Somebody did ask if we should record with the phone and take pictures. Absolutely. I take pictures of everything. I took pictures no matter what, because I was a musician in LA, so I drove way more than the average person anyways. So if I ever had a fender bender, if someone ran into my vehicle when I wasn't even there, I come out from a gig at 1:30 in the morning and somebody's hit my vehicle, not only did I take pictures of my vehicle, I took pictures of the entire surrounding area, just in case. Anything that you can give your insurance agent is going to be helpful, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Anybody have any other suggestions for what we should do if it's drivable versus not drivable? I'll give you one more example of something that I did. If it was drivable and you don't necessarily have to fix it right away, you have up to 4 years to make a claim. Okay. So in that case, like say you go and you get an offender bender in some other state, but your vehicle is very much drivable. There's no need to fix it right away. You want to wait until you can either get into some temporary housing with a friend, family member. In my case, I used trusted house sitters as to barter for housing while I was dealing with the fender bender and fixing that up. But you do not have to fix it right away. Keep that in mind. Something that you should do in both situations is definitely get pics. I don't think I'm ever going to stop saying get pics. So I'm going to go back to what you said. Recording with your phone, I will say this though, if it's in a private, like if you're in a parking lot, that is not considered public space. You may get some flack for that. But if you're in a public space, you're allowed to take video however much you want. I had somebody who road raged on me one time. He thought that he would get my goat, and then instead he realized I had a dash cam and he stopped trying to scam me. So it's one of those things where just having a camera in general is going to prevent you from dealing with people that are not doing it for the right reasons. So let's talk about the insurance, how you deal with them, because that I think is the hardest part. By far, it's the hardest part. So when you initially contact your insurance, I always say contact them at the scene. So that this is what you're doing at the scene. Remember, this is the section we're on. Okay, you only give them the info they need. You do not need to tell them exactly what happened. You are dealing with stuff. Okay, I do see Super K's question. Hey, Courtney. I'll get to that in a moment. Okay, because that's a good point about pets. When it comes to this is what I was talking about earlier. It depends on where you are. Yes, get as much information as you can. You go and you can put down their license plate number. You could take the pictures of their vehicles. You could do all of that stuff. But you may or may not be allowed to take down their actual information. And so in that case, you want to make sure that you get your law enforcement's jurisdiction and the assigned case number. They will usually give that to you on the spot. That one particular one with the Florida fender bender amongst the survivors, that law enforcement was so busy with so many other things because the whole place had been decimated that he only had a piece of paper, but he still gave me a case number, no matter what, okay? So that's gonna take some time, but that's what you're giving to the agent, okay? You're gonna give that to the agent after. So another thing that I'm gonna suggest, and this is just the whole CYA thing, where you're gonna write out your narration of what happened immediately. You're gonna gather your dash cam, your pictures, the information, you're gonna put it all in one place. Because this right here is what's going to help you when you start dealing with your insurance agents afterwards. Because you really do not want to be putting any sort of emotion into what you're telling your agents. This is not, I mean, yes, it'd be great to have time, but your words could be used against you. That brings me to number 2. If you say the wrong thing before your interview, make sure you know what your policy is. Make sure you know your policy limits. You should know that anyways, but make sure you know exactly what the terminology is. For instance, the people I was helping with in Hurricane Ian, they had insurance, but the fact that their home was flooded and they technically only have wind, you would think hurricane insurance would be both. Nope. So that's an example of some terminology. In the case of with vehicle accidents, if I can go more specific to that, you're not talking about anything other than the details that you need, but you need to know what you're telling them first, okay? So that's where writing down the stuff helps you get the emotion out so that when you're talking to your agent, you already pinpointed what they really need to know, because they will use it against you. They will say that your claim is not valid if not. And then when it comes to a lawyer, Don't tell them you have one. If you get a lawyer because you're getting knocked around a bit, don't tell them, because the second you do, they're going to stop talking to you. That is how it goes, because then it's now your lawyer has to deal with them. And so it just play your cards close to the heart, poker face it. You don't need to tell them everything. And you need to this one right here has saved me so much. Document everything. Document absolutely everything. Okay. If you call them, you immediately send an email that is confirming what you spoke about on the phone. That has saved me from the shop saying, oh, so-and-so said this and blah, 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 because I've had to email the shop, the adjuster, the agent, and the other shop that ended up having to do that. I emailed them all at once with, this is what I was told. This is what's been done. This is what's been messed up. And that is how I got my van back. So it's those kinds of things. You have to advocate for yourself for sure. And this right here, if you have medical costs, please, you have to save all of that stuff. They may or may not bill you immediately, but make sure that you are getting reimbursed. When it comes to rental costs, that for the vehicle, if you don't have rental on your insurance policy for personal, commercial, or RV, I highly suggest that you go switch it today, because the rental costs are through the roof now. So just make sure that if you don't want to deal with out-of-pocket expenses, that you do that. But if you're dealing with out-of-pocket because you're having to do with, like, if your RV insurance is $7,500 for emergency stuff, they most of the time do it through reimbursement. They don't do it where they rent the vehicle for you. Hotel costs, same thing, and anything else that's upfront costs. You might be surprised as to, being reimbursed for food if you're stuck in a place. That is a possibility through your emergency funds. It just depends on your insurance coverage. I have a couple questions I'm going to address right now before we get to the last section. I'm just cognitive of time too. So I was asked by Super K, what do we do with our pets? As I have had a pet on the road too, I completely understand this. When I got into the accident in which they totaled my van because it was on the side of the road and the guy didn't see me, my cat was in the van at the time, and we ended up, I had to check and make sure she wasn't injured. But you know what? The best thing I ever did for that cat is make it so that she had a place in the front seat with a secured, I got her used to using her carrier as her little harem, is what I called it, because I would set it up where it was all like super cozy in there. It was like her own little place. So I think that's the wrong word for it, but I was thinking like the genie in a bottle thing, all the couches and such. So she was super comfortable, super padded in there, and that was her designated spot. That's my number one thing I would say with pets. Secure them. If they're wandering around while you're driving, they're going to get hurt. I was so happy that my cat, in the 2 accidents that she had to deal with, that she did not get hurt in those circumstances. But that's my number one thing I would say. Make sure that you are securing your pets. That's the best way to save them. Okay. And so I was asked if there's a difference between pics versus video on a private property. Yes, with pictures, you're not dealing with sound. With video, it's the sound aspect. On private property, you might be asked by the people that own the property not to take those photos or pictures, or video, but it depends on the state you're in. You have 2-party and 1-party consent. 1-party consent means that as long as you're present, you're allowed to record audio, and 2-party consent is that the other person or any other parties has to also say. I think it's 2-party is where at least one other person has to say that's present that they're okay with being recorded. So that's more the difference of the private and the public property stuff. And yes, you could absolutely stand on a public sidewalk and take pictures and videos of the lot itself. If it's a private parking lot and you're concerned about whether or not you're going to get in trouble, all it really matters is that the insurance sees the proof. So it bolsters your claim. Okay, so that's really what it is. Unless it's getting to a lawsuit, that's when you're dealing with the 2-party and 1-party issues. But for the most part, you're really just doing it for your insurance. So let's get to our last section. Oh, wait, sorry. I see there's 2 more. My bad. So we are going to always assume that that the insurance company is going to try to not pay out any money. That is where we get into our next section. We have 4 minutes left, so I appreciate you just hearing me talk a bunch about this stuff. But I want you to think about what you have to do after the accident itself. So say you're ready. You're getting on the road. Are you sure you've got it all covered? Because once you get on the road, and if you don't have a dash cam, then that means that you have a way bigger task at hand. However, having this all in place and having your emergency plan with your coordinated team, that is your support network, your insurance, your health insurance, etc. That is your main goal. So a place to stay. In this case, what I've done with a place to stay is that in the when I had to deal with the one in which it took out my vehicle and it was not drivable anymore, that was obviously an Airbnb, but I honestly had to hunker down for 6 months because it was in 2020. So that was real fun. And I hunkered down and then bought the new van and such. So sometimes you don't have that luxury. So in this case, this is when you go and you reach out to the organizations. That'll be the next thing. But the rental vehicle, make sure, again, go to your policy. And if you can get rental insurance on there, it definitely helps. It's usually not that much more. It's worth it. Okay. But I've also bartered for places to stay through like pet sitting. So that is another way to do it. So I did that when I had to repair this van from that fender bender that happened in Florida. When it comes to organizations that can help, we have heard of some other organizations that are here amongst us, such as Nomads Helping Nomads, obviously Home on Wheels Alliance, the National Coalition for Homelessness. You have all these organizations, but they're really big. Or like spread out and everything. I shouldn't say big. They're spread out and everything. And so you have to be patient. And this comes with advocacy. I wish everybody was able to advocate for themselves. That's why the organizations are very helpful. If you're not a good advocate, then you need to go and get into contact with these organizations now, so you have them already in your phone, on your Facebook, your social media, whatever. But that's what it comes down to, is you got to be patient, because it could take months. It took a month to fix this van from the fender bender because the dealership was messing up stuff. I was having to tow it all over Austin to find a shop that could even deal with a van this tall. Okay, so it's one of those things where you have to be patient, but you have to be on top of it. And if you can't be on top of it, contact an organization that can advocate for you. We know that some people are advocates and some people are not. No judgment. Just make sure someone is advocating. But last but not least, this is the question that still gets asked the most on Facebook, on all the other platforms I've ever seen. Whether to rebuild or not, based on the damages, the advantages and disadvantages. I will say that a major disadvantage of having a vehicle be totaled is that now you have to rebuild again, or you can't get all of the components that you had before. And sorry, I got muted for a second. My bad. Let me go back. That's okay. Let me go back for a second. So just make sure that when you are getting ready to go on the road, that you know that if you have more than like half of your panels that are damaged, they're going to total it. Framework, you would think that as expensive as the vans are these days, that the framework would be easy. Try getting a shop that has the capabilities to do something with a gigantic van like this. So that's what it comes down to, is that you have to go into it knowing that you might have to deal with a totaled vehicle, that you're not going to have the luxury of rebuilding possibly. So if we're reflecting back on our stuff, because we're ending our session right now, I'd like to know, if you can, while we're still in here, to think about some takeaways that you got from this workshop. I'm pretty sure that there's plenty that I could have covered, but what challenges did we not address that you feel you would like to have addressed? I'm going to be putting together a little bit of a resource guide later for all the stuff that I talked about with insurance. I'll include the dash cam stuff to look for as opposed to individual links. But then last and not least, how do you personally learn survival and thriving techniques while living in a vehicle? that is how you're going to most likely need to lean the most on your support network, but even for yourself, because it is a patience game. So you're not going to lose everything if you prepare ahead of time. Thank you so very much. I appreciate everybody being here. I appreciate having the opportunity to be hosted by the National Vehicle Residency Collective for how not to lose everything due to an accident. Y'all have been awesome. Take care. Happy trails out there, and see you around.